So we are, what is this, 8 lines from the top, 7 lines from the top of the Lamed Aleph. The line begins with the word Hamoichin. And we were discussing the Ayin of the Koiches Ne'alomim. We discussed yesterday the principle of Koiches Ne'alomim. Where essentially the Koiches Ne'alomim have their awareness and their functionality in and of themselves, not because of the fact that they encounter the world or anything external. It is all from themselves, from inside, from the nefesh itself. The midos and the moichin and all that. It is sort of like an inherent knowledge. The moichin and the midos. And therefore, there, at that stage, there is not the process of one koyach supplying the means for the other koyach. They're all substantiated directly by the nefesh itself. When the nefesh substantiates the principle of moichin, and the nefesh substantiates the principle of midos. The basic reality that they all recognize is the nefesh. Reality of the nefesh. In koiches hagluim, at the functional level, there the whole reality is provided by Chochmah, by the koiches. What makes you aware that there is anything to be dealt with? It is Chochmah. And therefore everything is dependent on the Chochmah. Whereas in the koiches HaNe'alomim, it is the nefesh itself. That this is what provides the basic reality. Therefore, each koyach has its own sense of what it is. Yet still, we pointed out two phenomena. Number one, that even in that arena, there is a difference between one koyach and another, because inherently moichin are a superior quality of a koyach than midos, as we discussed yesterday. Moichin relates to the essential truth of the nefesh. As we said, moichin states this is how it should be. Midos speaks about the presence. This is how it is. Therefore, moichin are of a superior quality than midos. And in light of that, the midos, when there is a gilui of the midos by themselves, then it is one quality of midos. When there's the midos and isgala, and the moichin are also be isgalas, sensing the presence of the moichin, the midos have an element of bittul, because they sense the supreme quality of the moichin. So they misbattle legabe his galas hameichin. And therefore, the moichin there too have an effect on the midas. All right. Again, just to give it as a refreshing look, so we'll not be talking about some kind of a remote terminology. When you start to relate to moichin and midas and koiches, which is nothing novel to us because we discuss it all the time as we're going on. Particularly, this is what the Maimon is all about, to point out that there is the oineg ha-nefesh flowing through the koiches. The koiches, again, completely contrary to what would appear to be, on a superficial view, the koiches are not reactive. They are proactive. They create the whole reality. In our physical world, starting from the simplest, how do we walk? Yes, we walk, we put one foot in front of the other, but really what enables us to walk? It is the friction, the pushing off against the ground. If not for the pushing off against the ground, we couldn't walk. So the koyach ha-hiluch is not a full-fledged koyach ha-hiluch. It is something which is dependent on the circumstance. You push against the ground, so it moves. To conceptualize that there's in fact a koyach ha-hiluch already is a challenge. This is how it is in koyach ha-hiluch. And this is true in the lowest koyches, in koyach ha-hiluch, for example. And it is even true in seichel. Because the seichel chitzoni, the way seichel is perceived in the world, it is also not seichel koyach ha-nefesh. It is also a kind of external proof. Like we said, one-on-one is not two. One-on-one is two ones. So that's not a seichel thing. That's defining a fact. Two ones doesn't change the situation whether it's one-on-one or two ones. Two ones is the identical statement as one-on-one. Doesn't change anything. The concept of two, that's a completely different concept. That's already a nefesh concept. So therefore, it is always important to emphasize and to bring out, when we talk about koiches ha-nefesh, we're talking about koiches ha-nefesh. That it is true because, that its concept is true because there's a nefesh behind it. This is why we perceive it. Not because there is the external fact that we recognize. Because, as we point out, two ones is not seichel at all. Even animals also know two ones. But two is only in a human realm, only on the seichel level. So therefore, we can now go back and understand that there are koiches ha-nefesh and there's koiches ne'alomi, koiches that are really inherent in nefesh, and they're totally bound out of nefesh. They don't have a functional element at all. They don't have an external effect at all. And yet, still, there's a cognizance and a recognition between one koich and another. And the midas recognize the presence of moichin, and as a result of that, there's an element of beetle in the midas themselves. This bitul is not a bitul that gives the midos and moichin element, like in koches agluim, because they're independent. But it is simply the principle that a lesser quality is misbat in the presence of a greater quality. Okay, so now we start inside. The line begins with what hamoichin, and this is what is it about 8 lines from the top. Lamed Aleph. And therefore, v'hamoichin poyalim al hamidus. The moichin have an effect on the midas. As we pointed out, and he said, nira b'chush. We can actually see it b'chush in our sensitivity, in a sensitive manner. We promised to discuss this a little bit nira b'chush. Chush, the word chush, as we translate it, actually means a sense. This is a very special phenomenon in life, bichlal, but human being in particular. We have 4 chushim, generally speaking: sight, hearing, smell, and taste. And then there is chush hamishus and the touch and all that. This is all chush. Now the phenomenon of chushim, although this is, so to speak, on the lower level, like touch. Touch is a physical phenomenon. Physical experience. It doesn't compare to seichel. Seichel and midas are much higher nefesh elements than chush. But then there is a certain quality in chushim that actually is more sensitive and more discerning than even seichel and midas. Like he pointed out one time that the feel, the gashmistic feel of something very, very fine that has hardly any effect on the physical experience of the hand, and the feel of it is only because there is a life element in the hand, and it's sensitive to that fine thing. That sensitivity is bringing a factual experience in the world at a very, very fine and level. That's called chush. Like we say, re'iyah. We always say, talk about re'iyah, shmiyah. In that respect, there's a great similarity. That even though we say that in hearing, for example, there is a factual effect, the sound effect hits the eardrum and it actually disturbs the calm. This is how the sound reaches the ear. But the chush hashmiyah, is a ruch musikin. The sound itself you hear because of some kind of a physical effect, but the chush is a very sensitive ear. Like we hear the difference between one sound and another. Like we said before, a fine and a pleasant voice. The pleasantness of the voice, that's not part of the physical experience. This is a chush. This is the sensitivity of the nefesh. So therefore, in chush, we can sense that which we cannot even describe, which cannot describe, which doesn't lend itself to be described. You have, for example, two people playing a violin, and they're both playing the same song and playing it correctly, but the sound is totally different. And you hear a completely different song. That is the sensitivity to the sound. That's not the sound itself. Because they sing it, they play it exactly identical. So this is the Inyan, he says, that this Inyan, because these koiches panimi, koiches manelomim, because these koiches do not have an external presence, their presence is really the presence of the nefesh, and therefore they each exist independently, and the effect of one upon the other is not something that we can really describe, because they come independently. There's an interesting, comes to mind, an interesting phenomenon, poshet in the natural world. Trees grow up, but it's interesting that if you have a tree growing on its own, independent and completely in open space, without any trees surrounding it, it will spread in every direction. When it's in a forest, when it has trees around it goes straight up. It's a much straighter stand. Even though this is a tree, it doesn't have a sensitivity. I shouldn't intrude on the other tree's space. This is something which is in a sense a kind of on the chush level. It's just the reality, you could say, reality of nature. This inyan, that midos are affected by seichel, by moichi, in the koiches hanelomim, is identifiable only b'chush. Because, as you said, the midos have the same toikev and the same insistence and the same intolerance, and yet there is a certain beetle, recognition that there is something greater than themselves. And the moichen have an effect on the midas. V'im kain, and therefore, harei behechrach lo imar. Therefore, it becomes clear, and it's behechrach. It's a logical imperative that we have to conclude and say, shegam bozeh, that even there, harei hei mekablim alidei hamoichen, that the midas receive their effect, their oil hanefesh, alidei hamoichin, through the moichin. But we just finished saying that here they have a direct access to the nefesh. רק except שהוא באופן אחר מקמי בכוח הגלוי. The phenomenon that the midas are receiving על ידי המכין is true even in the koiches hanelon. The fact that we took all the pains to point out that no, that they don't receive to the mechin, they receive directly from the nefesh, different than koiches hagluim, that remains true, but it's not that clear of a cutoff. There is an effect of the mechin. How do we know? We see this al de'achush. The fact that the midas are sensitive to the presence of the meichin, that itself tells you that there is some kind of an interrelationship. Let's continue a little bit. So it's be'efon achem mikmeishu b'kechet aglui. It's different than the way it is in kechet aglui. But nevertheless, ha'hamshocha hu alidei amtzos ha'mechin bichlal. The hamshocha into the midas is alidei amtzos ha'mechin via the intermediacy of the mechin in general. B'kech ha'chochma b'prat, and particularly kech ha'chochma. Most importantly, the kech ha'chochma. Why? And why is it? Why is it that these midas which are kechas ne'elam, which are kechas inherent in the nefesh, why do they need to come through the chochma? And the explanation is mipnei shekech hachochma, because that the koyach chochma hu mikol mokoim b'kirav yesher aletzam nefesh. That koyach hachochma is nevertheless, despite the fact that all the koiches are contained in the nefesh. The nefesh has everything and can relate directly to all the various koiches. But it is still closer to the etzem nefesh. And thus, all hamshoches with the nefesh, even the hamshoches that we say it comes directly from the nefesh, there is nevertheless the element of chokhmah involved in all the hamshochas. So, this is kind of a complete turnaround of what we said before, and therefore, what is the demand there? The requirement there is to be able to sense the difference between the koiches hagluim and the koiches hane'elam, and at the same time also recognize the similarity. But to recognize that similarity is really dissimilar. The similarity itself is not really similar. This is where the principle of chush comes in. Because there is not, what we right here, and in front of our own eyes, is described one way and then the opposite.
Recognized through chush what?
The difference between koiches hagluim and the similarity. So the principle, the Rebbe points out, is koyach hachochma hu mikol mokoim b'kirav yesher olatzon. What does mikol mokoim mean? Even though the midos are also drawn directly from the nefesh. As we said all along. There is not an external solicitation. It is directly from the nefesh. Yet still, the chokhmah is still closer to the etzem hanefesh than the other koiches.
Even in the ne'elam.
Even in the ne'elam. And the chol hamshochet me'hanefesh hu al derech chokhmah. To get a little bit of a handle, a little bit of an insight to this, what is being said, that the chokhmah is in the kol mokim closer to etzem hanefesh. What is it closer to etzem hanefesh? What is what etzem all of a sudden pointing out here? Why not closer el hanefesh? The principle alluding to the union of etzem over here the term etzem, as we point out all the time, is something which in our world does not exist. And the simple reason is because in our world there is not a single thing that is that is a single reality. Everything is a conglomerate. Everything is put together from multiple sides, multiple details. In principle, Zman u'mokim. In our world, everything is Zman u'mokim. Mokim, what is mokim? Mokim, by definition, consists of 6 different dimensions. There's no mokim. No nakuda of mokim. This bank already consists of 6 different dimensions. Already you can see it from 6 different angles. This is the way things are in our world. So that is true mitzad everything in the world. The nefesh is really, as we point out all the time, nefesh is really not part and parcel of the world. Nefesh is a godly presence. It's not a worldly presence. Nefesh is an atzma. In other words, it is true to what it is because of what it is, not because of any kind of circumstances. The reason that the nefesh, we explained all along, the reason that the nefesh has koiches ne'elam, like yesterday in particular, is not because the nefesh has koiches ne'elam, but because of the fundamental truth of the nefesh itself, the etzem. Etzem. Okay, this is the second solution. Etzem, by virtue of being an etzem, has everything. Etzem means that it's completely self-sufficient. It has everything that. And I pointed out, having everything is already a misnomer. Everything is pertaining to chokhmah, but to nefesh itself, there's no everything. It's the whole reality. It's interesting that Rashi points out when Esav and Yankov met, and Yankov was giving Esav this great gift, and Esav said. There was an exchange over there. Esav said, I have a lot. And Yankov said, I have all. So you would think when you say I have all, it's more exaggeration than saying I have a lot. Rashi points out, no, Esav spoke like a Balgaiva. I have a lot. Yaakov said, I have all. All is a greater statement than everything.
Than a lot.
Huh?
Than a lot.
Than a lot. And that is the point. Esav said, I have a lot. His whole mitzvah is the spread out. Yaakov said, I have all that I can possibly need. A lot or a little is insignificant. This all element is not a worldly concept. Like you point out, in the world there's no such thing as all. I have the reality itself. This is what Yaakov said. This is the Etzem HaNefesh. This reality, this all element, is is what Chochmah relates to, more than the other koyches. Even though the other koyches also come from Nefesh because of this Etzem element. But Chochmah in particular relates to this Etzem element. And with this we'll have to interrupt. All right, this is it for this morning. We will convene again tomorrow. Have a good day.
This last thing, this is the push to sense the all of the nefesh. By Chochmah.
No. But for us to sense a difference between all, for us to sense a difference of all and a lot, that requires a push.